So, take two. I was sitting here about, playing my guitar and kind of thinking, all right, I'm going to do a video on glamoring. And then I thought, wait a second, too. I want to do another one on discernment. And so I text myself those things to remind myself, okay, get that started. And then I thought, obviously these are somewhat about the same issues and questions and apparatuses. So they may meld together or become one. And I don't know what I'm going to post about when I do these. I'm not sitting here with an outline seeming like I'm talking. Like, this is just literally off the cuff. That seems to be how I roll. Um, so I don't know that I want to just get into defining glamoring and making this all about like a typical person's YouTube video. I want to make it an exploration, which these are for me. But I tend to think of glamoring as a means by which someone uses uh, their allure, and often sexual, to trick someone into parting with their money or believing or wanting them or, buying a product or whatever, um, and not realizing that they're being taken by their sexual drives or their desire for money or wealth or lust or whatever kind of drives. It's designed to mystify things and to distract one from using their own more conscious discernment. Like, let's say, an example would be as a younger guy, I would go out and drink and go to bars, and of course, I went to the most attractive bartender, and when they would act like they liked me, I would tip them better. But they were glamoring me. I wasn't going to go home with that beautiful bartender that night, and not that that would never happen or something like that, but that this was a game that people were playing, and it's not just women. Of course, men do it. It's not picking on women. But I guess what I'm talking about is on the micro level, there are people that I know and see who I believe use glamoring techniques in order to present themselves as either prestigious or more knowledgeable on the subject than they are, and to present themselves as so desirable as to get likes and hits um, and shares and products sold, and because of their sexual attractiveness and their desirability, as opposed to saying, "Hey, I'm a scientist, and this is the purified water that I use, or these makeup products are good because the science says so." No, it's like, look at my cleavage. And so I feel like that is deceptive in its nature. And then obviously we can look at the broader world and say, well, food and alcohol and tobacco and car companies have been doing this for years, using models to distract you and act like, hey, isn't this glamorous? Aren't we beautiful? Don't you want to be beautiful? If you have a Ferrari, you'll have a beautiful woman like this, or you'll be a stud like this guy, and whatever. So I always felt like that was dishonest marketing and misleading, and the whole goal of it seemed to be to get people to part with their money, but to be temporarily bedazzled, and so as to not be able to perceive, to be entranced by either their sexual drives or the looks of this person or the allure that they offer, so as to not be able to discern what's best for them. And this is how people, give that tip or buy, an impulse buy or buy the more expensive cigar or whatever, because they've been imprinted by these people and these acts and these advertisements and this kind of chicanery. And so if my channel is about anything, it's been about pointing out the ways in which we get fooled. And whether that's with propaganda or fallacies or both, or again, glamoring is just kind of one of the latest ones that I want to point out that's been kind of lingering in my mind, saying, hey, talk about this. Because I think they're all designed to trick people out of perceiving appropriately in a bias, like or racism or sexism or any of these things, xenophobia, tribalism, um, are easy ways to go around one's conscious capacity to perceive and to make them either feel, again, sexually attracted or under threat or certain that they're correct or, again, propagandized in order to follow a leader who will not serve their interest because he promises them, the alleviation of suffering and things like that. So if that's my game, then glamoring is the one I want to talk about today because even though we've kind of become decentralized in the sense that we don't like get our news from NBC or the big companies and we don't only have three channels and things like that from when like my parents were kids and stuff like that. Um, so everything is so fragmented that people are like YouTube influencers and stuff like that. I'm like, hey, like I'm trying to be that, I guess, in a sense. But the difference that between, let's just say, me and somebody who's, um, really successful at it often is, hey, they're more organized, they do it every day, they maybe work harder at these things and etc. But some people are glamoring, like let's say some dudes that are, um, talking about working out and stuff, and their shirts off, and they've got like the perfect masculine, low fat, high muscle body. And so while those men might look at that and say, okay, look, he's living what he's saying, maybe he could just look like that. I know people that just look like that. So that person could also be glamoring them into saying like, wow, I want to look like that. I could look like that. I'm going to buy his products versus someone else's. There might be some fat dude or less in shape person that knows 10 times as much as that person, but they don't have the capacity to kind of glamour you into believing that you'll get that from them. Or for me, as a heterosexual male, um, it's been easy to be glamored again by the bartender who is really attractive, pretending like they like me, so I tip better. And that's just kind of like a game we play, and it's just glamour. It doesn't always have to be so evil or something like that. Or again, it's just um, you buy the magazine with the pretty person on the cover because you want to feel the way that their looks make you feel, or you want to imagine yourself being them, and so you buy the cigar or the car or the watch or whatever. So what glamoring is kind of selling you a fantasy. Hey, you could either have me, or have this, or be this, if you use this product. If you give us your money, we'll give you a thing. And what we're saying is the cigar is just a cigar, but ours is so good that you'll be a stud or you'll get the girl. And that's dishonest. No, you won't. You could have a Ferrari and just never have sex again. You could have this cool watch and just not have the stuff of of that would get the lifestyle you want. These things are just secondary um, things, and I think we know that at a conscious level. And then when we interact with one who is um, glamoring us, we momentarily lose our capacity to perceive correctly, and thusly um, can get fooled or tricked into doing what the advertiser or the glamorer wants us to do. And that's kind of the stuff of like vampire movies and um, just they just kind of like bedazzle and befuddle someone. And so while I clearly always saw that my whole life in advertisements for cigarettes, alcohol, food, clothing, and what have you, as a middle-aged person, that's where the technology has now changed. I watch people on YouTube and elsewhere use their sex appeal to either sell a product that isn't necessarily better because this person's sexy, or to kind of play a game whereby they are offering something, but really the end result is that they're illegitimately kind of tricking you with their sex appeal. And what they're saying is, don't you want to watch my next video? Not because of necessarily the overt thing I offer, but because of how hooked you are on the drugs that you get when you look at my attractive body and imagine being with me. And, or they may be selling or involved in something that they really aren't particularly suited for or expert in, but use their sex appeal for the purpose of going around one's objective discernment to get them to kind of purchase or do this thing anyway. And to me, I just think it's ugly and deceptive. I'm not saying that people shouldn't flaunt what they've got, um, um, whatever their status may be. That's really kind of fair game in some ways. And so I magically transported to my living room. And um, so to me, the gist of the story is that men and women both, just like all the advertisers did and still do, seem to be trying to trick people with that. And while I understand that these big companies would do this, and I don't like it necessarily too, part of what's getting me and bothering me is that, in the same sense that people are becoming like little politicians, where they talk the same talking points and they do like whatever the bidding of a certain candidate and now president again does and did, they're kind of like little minions that do and say the same things and instead of seeming autonomous. And what I'm noticing about the individuals who I think glamour on YouTube and Instagram and elsewhere is that I think they're like taking those same tricks from those advertisers and doing the same thing. So while it would seem to be liberating on one level to be like, hey, I made my money on YouTube, um, and I didn't have to go through these companies, and it was very democratic. It's like, yes, but at the same time, you're being like those gross companies that were being gross about their product, like selling absolute motherfucking poison like cigarettes, and trying to tell these women like, hey, you've arrived. We're feminists with you, and so we're so excited for you that we want to sell you our product that is going to kill you and harm you and addict you so that other women can see you using our Virginia Slims and addict themselves and die from lung cancer. Like that is absolute predatory, disgusting behavior. And I'm not saying that these people on YouTube are selling cigarettes, but what I mean is that those companies were absolutely free of ethics in many times. And alcohol isn't tobacco. Like tobacco, as like the American product is like useless. Like you just smoke it to feel better for a minute or whatever. It's not like they're using it as like some Native American medicine or something like that. It's just like a cancer stick, and alcohol can be kind of similar. Um, you can get cancer, you can get addicted, you can drive drunk, you can harm people. And I'm not trying to make this a screed against alcohol, not in the least. I don't use it because it doesn't agree with me. Um, but these were really ethically challenged companies using misleading practices and sexualizing things and glamoring people in order to sell what was often an absolutely poisonous, useless product. And so when we look back and talk about that, that's sickening. And I'm saying now we've got a bunch of individuals on these social media platforms doing a similar thing. And again, none of them are selling cancer like that. But I do think that they're still misleading people into thinking like glamoring them long enough that they think like, okay, I'll buy whatever your earthy products are, because you're so beautiful, and as a female, I wish I was as beautiful as you, and maybe I'll be as beautiful as you when I use them, and they won't. And then for a male to look at them, they're kind of being glamour and saying like I could get with her, or almost like we do with the bartender, that kind of thing, that kind of game and that dance. But the bartender thing is pretty innocuous in that the bartender with a wink and a nod is kind of flirting with you to get better tips. But you're enjoying that interaction, and you were going there for the beer, and maybe you found another woman to interact with, and you guys went home or whatever it was. But it wasn't like the person. I mean, it might be somewhat deceptive, but it's pretty innocent. I think we kind of, as adults, kind of all know that there's a little bit of innocent glamoring, or at least neutral. At least it's kind of neutral. Like, I wanted to go to the bar. I wanted somebody to flirt with me. I wanted to drink alcohol. I wanted to throw some money around, and I did all those things. That's pretty innocuous, pretty neutral. Let's say nobody made you do anything. Um, but it's not like, I think that inherent in the kind of glamoring I'm seeing is kind of like this, a promise, or just a bypassing of one's capacity to perceive, because inevitably they're there to sell you something. When you go to the bar to buy something, you're there to see and be seen, be out with your buddies or your girls or whatever it is. And so this kind of bartender or server interaction, if there's flirting and glamoring, is part of the game there, and everybody's an adult. But I think when you're going online to YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, it's not necessarily with an obvious and overt purpose, and certainly not to buy something. But you are in a marketplace whether you know it or not. So there's some vagueness and ambiguity, and you may want to eventually buy a product, but I think what the person is saying on YouTube, let's just say YouTube as an example, like, hey, if you listen to me long enough, I'm you're going to be in my funnel, and I'm going to try to sell you a class, a book, a product, knowledge and information, and that may be good knowledge and information. The real question is whether it's valid, whether it works, or what have you. But I'm just bummed that people would have to glamour in order to sell. And sometimes there have been scenarios where I've seen people that were glamoring, and they really had no business being in the field and offering the service that they were offering. And I felt like, okay, this is really kind of the Wild West, wide open for people to offer whatever they want. And 20, 30, 40 years ago, you'd go learn things in a very like controlled environment. You'd go to a school, a college, a foundation, and you'd learn massage at the massage school, and so it was so controlled as to be able to be maybe too restrictive, and then but also to kind of keep charlatans from doing that. And maybe what I'm getting at is that this kind of Wild West YouTube kind of place is cool and liberating in so many ways, but it's kind of a subtle marketplace. And I really do think that it's become a place where charlatans like oh, what's his name, Jordan Peterson or something like that, you know, reign supreme. And because they're so exciting or interesting, and again, the women with the looks, the men with the muscular bodies, and Jordan Peterson can say, "Well, look, I'm a psychologist, and listen how fast I talk and the big words I use," and people kind of get tricked out of and propagandized and sold products they don't need, or sold products from people that don't necessarily have a expertise in that area, because they enjoy looking at beautiful women, and they fantasize about looking at a male body that could be theirs, and so just from a male perspective, because I am, and I think that's ugly. And so even though there's been a liberation of media in that we can all make media and we can all do it as we will, and we don't have to look at those 3 or 10 or 20 or 5,000 channels on TV, it's still people. and people still glamour. And while we're in this Wild West setting, I think a lot of people get glamored into buying things they don't need. A lot of people end up following movements that they don't understand and that seem innocuous and are not. And I certainly think that's how Trump has been reelected, and conspiracy theories have been passed around. So I'm saddened to look and see glamoring coming from individuals, because I maybe previously thought that that was something that was, coming from big bad companies, down to an unsuspecting populace. But then when I see people I know and don't know on these channels and on these platforms just using trickery, either intellectual trickery or sexual glamoring or whatever it is, propagandizing people, and I'm thinking, gosh, it's not just those big bad businesses. Those big bad businesses were run by people, and those people were either malevolent or benevolent, and the companies came out the ways they did. But it's the same on the micro level too. We're not like innocent down here, and these guys are bad up there. Like, people will do whatever they can in self-interest, and glamoring is, you know, self-interested behavior presenting itself as offering something to the other and misleading and tricking them, and tricking them out of their money or their attention or their sexual energy, or their focus or their capacity to perceive correctly. And I think it's ugly, and I just wish it would stop. I wish it wasn't so. And I wish people that are often the purveyors of this didn't feel like they had to do that, or weren't resting on their laurels and saying, well, I'm a beautiful woman, and so I'm going to present my beautiful body and my beautiful looks, and thus whatever suppositions I'm selling must be true because I'm so cute, and look at me in this glamorous picture and on this island and drinking this drink and selling this thing, and acting like it's cool. And uh, and I'm trying to think of when I was young. There wasn't the social media and stuff like that, and when I was young I was pretty handsome. Coming up on 50, was looking back at some pictures where I was like 20, and I was, um, but I didn't have the ability. Maybe I didn't have the physique or the confidence or whatever that was to like glamour people, and I didn't have that like, whoa, he's got that it that you just walk in the room and everybody kind of bows before you. I didn't have that. And I know women that look like that. I know men that have a kind of a more charisma than I had, and I definitely had it and have it. Um, but I guess this comes down to a question that I've seen recently, and this might seem like virtue signaling or may be virtue signaling. I don't know, and I don't care. That there's people that are like two different ways. There's truth seekers and there's power seekers, and it doesn't mean that you have to like follow that dichotomy, and that you're never a power seeker if you're a truth seeker, or that people that are power seekers aren't necessarily curious about truth. But what I'm getting at is that when I'm in my unconscious younger states, I might have been power seeking, or misunderstanding, or I might fall into traps like that now, being glamored or propagandized or tricked by, internally or externally. But that what I want to understand is the truth. I'm curious about what really makes people tick. I really want to know how things work. Not so that I can amass power, but because I really want to know how it works. I want to understand. I want peace and freedom and all the stuff like everybody else does. And it seems like other people may be wired to say, I want to know the truth of things, but only in so much as it serves me to amass power. And I think it's possible that some of us are built one way, some of us are built another, or that we can easily be manipulated into following, let's say, a cult leader who teaches us and tricks us into and glamours us into, you know, being power seekers. And I think that's what's going on with Trump and Trumpism, of course. And so that's part of what saddens me about our culture, is that there's kind of no like ethical, like, is this good? Should I do this? Is this what's best? Or Is this like what we can get away with? And I think when these people are glamoring on YouTube and et cetera, just using their sexuality to kind of profiteer off of the vulnerabilities and the interest and the sexuality of their watchers and listeners, I just feel like um, it's gross. Like they're just being really manipulative, and it doesn't mean that they don't also maybe have some benevolent goals, or some of them might not be sharing good knowledge. It doesn't have to be black and white. Like I'm saying, like you're either glamoring or you're benevolent, or you're either a truth seeker or a power seeker. Because to go super ADD on you, you could deal with somebody who uses some major gaslighting and narcissistic techniques, but who isn't a narcissist, who doesn't like have the goal of like screwing with your mind, but then when they're in the trenches and like you're in a fight or something like that, may use those techniques because they learned them as a child. And so I think it's the same thing when it comes to this truth seekers versus power seekers. It doesn't mean that there's like a team over here, Autobots and Decepticons, and never the twain shall meet, but that we have to decide which one we're being and which one we are, and honor that kind of ethic. If we're the truth seeker, if we're a power seeker, we don't have to do any such thing. And realize that it matters what we do, and it matters how we do things. It matters what motivation um, is at hand when we do what we do, because we what we do and what we say matters, and how we do it matters, and our motivations matter. Um, I guess I'm kind of saying on a cosmic level, like it's just kind of been dawning on me recently that it's not just what you do, because what you do could be have a mystical kind of a mysterious, or a kind of a multitude um, of motivations behind it, or potential motivations behind it. And so I think we have to get clear with ourselves, like what are we doing, why are we doing it, who's harmed, who's helped, instead of saying like I can get away with this and I can seem benevolent. Like that's not okay anymore, because some of, and a lot of, I'd say, the people that are sometimes glamoring us are selling spiritual information, knowledge, psychic information, stuff like that. So they're glamoring, saying like, hey, I'm a psychic and I've got this, and there's no way of saying, of doubting or disproving what they're saying. And I'm not here to argue against psychism or anything like that. How would I know? Like I've certainly been to read by intuitives and psychics, and I was like, oh my gosh, they really know things. There's no way they could have known that. And I've also been to people, and I was like, you cannot do this. You're not good at this, or at least with me, or you're being a charlatan. You're tricking me out of my money, and all, just like any other thing. Good restaurants, bad restaurants, honest politicians, dishonest or really dishonest politicians, whatever. So I don't want to make these hard and fast distinctions and say that like there's something wrong with psychism. What I'm saying is that when you get into fields like that, you can really glamour people, because there's no way of saying like, okay, no, there was no gold in that necklace. That's an objective criterion. This person sold me a necklace and said it was gold and it was brass. But there's no way of doing that with certain fields, and so they can be ripe for manipulation. And some people that I've seen online and in person and do that too, play that game as well. And I feel like they do it in order to survive and make money and be well. But that there's got to be some kind of a karmic question there. Your soul is watching. The universe is watching, is kind of the point I'm making. And I kind of got some of that, um, those thoughts brought to me, just kind of like in dreams, and just kind of thinking like, gosh, if if there is a God or if the universe is alive or something like that, it probably doesn't miss anything. So I've been acting as if that's the case lately. And it might make me apologize. It might make me think about it before I do something and check myself and check my motivations. And not because we have to, see ourselves in camps, like the good guys are over here and the bad guys are over there, like that kind of ethics, but that the effect of our behaviors may be different based on ethical considerations. That ethics aren't merely like philosophical, is kind of the point that's coming through to me. And I'm not wording it very well, but that ethics may affect the outcomes in ways that are not easily discernible. And whether that affects our psychological or psycho-spiritual development, don't know why I'm so itchy in the nose and mouth right now. Um, so I guess that's what I'm getting at is if you believe in reincarnation or something like that, you're trying to grow. You're either going up or you're going down. It's kind of hard to stay still. So I think that people sometimes that are profiting off of their glamoring or etc., might think they are and be presenting themselves as if they were one thing and really are another thing or being another thing and might be profiting off of deception and deceiving others. And they can rationalize it. It's easy to rationalize it, especially in a culture and a milieu like this where the very leader is a liar. The leader is a criminal. The leader is um, deceiving constantly. And so that trickles down. That's trickled down, um, you know, I don't know what the term would be, trickle down ethics or lack thereof. And so what we're seeing is like a free for all, again, Wild West, and partly because of the tech, but it really matters what we do. And so, in lieu of having an ethical framework handed down via the culture, via the church, the church, the Christian church was the rule, the Catholic Church in Europe, and then it became a Protestant thing in the Middle Ages, and then that came over to America mostly. And so that really kind of was like, hey, you got your most everybody was Christian. You got your ethical framework from this centralized place, and that was fraught with all sorts of problems, but it's good. You kind of knew what the rules were, and so in the absence of and in the decline of religious institutions and in the absolute decline of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we're going to have to look inward for our ethics and soul search about what's um, what's right and wrong via listening to our intuition, as opposed to um, buying it or experiencing it via church. And even in church, there's still like, is it okay to be gay? Or, what does this church think about abortion? How come that church says it's okay and this church says it's not? Or this one says you need to believe in Jesus only, and then this one's saying you need to do these acts. So even within those dogmatic, hierarchical religious structures and desert religions that we in the West, think of as religion, even within that, there's so much variation. There's so much variation on specific Bibles and their wording and their interpretation and um, translations from different languages that they were in, the 3 or 4 different original languages that they kind of passed through over thousands of years. So um, I'm sensing that like we have to go within and say like, am I really in alignment when I do this? And I had to do that the other night about something, and it was funny because when I went in, I was saying to myself, something doesn't feel right about this behavior I'm doing. And then as I checked in, I stuck with the behavior. So it wasn't like the voice was necessarily saying like, this is wrong, don't do this. It was saying, check in with me. It was saying, find out. And so, and it didn't have me change the behavior. And it's not in charge, it's just part of me. So I think that we need to look at ourselves and say, like, am I glamoring? Am I, you know, are my words and behaviors and deeds in alignment with what I believe in and what I profess and what I pretend, or, and what I'm presenting myself as? Am I living this thing that I'm selling myself as? And so when ethics can be an internal question where someone truly is searching for what's right and what's real and what's kind and what's loving, then we don't have to go to external intermediaries or dictators of, or way stations of, or um, gatekeepers of information and or spiritual information like the priest. And the priest might be great. And if you're great with your priest and you do a confession and talk to them and go to church and you like the sermon and it works, we can do it, man. Like I'm not sitting here trying to turn anybody off from religion. What I'm merely stating is that spirituality, ethics can emanate from inside as well. And many of those religions also speak of that. So it doesn't have to be an either or. Sometimes we speak in that way because of the limitations of language and conceptualization through um, obvious binaries or something like that. So that doesn't mean that I'm trying to say that the binaries are absolute, but merely a means by which we convey and express information and difference. Um, Getting deep. So when I guess glamoring brought me to this place of, can we check in with ourselves about our ethics? And maybe glamoring works sometimes too. Maybe like, let's just say like there was a beautiful woman um, that was like wearing revealing clothing, and that attracted a bunch of men to, something like breast cancer. And then all of a sudden men and women and everyone were donating more to breast cancer. Those men were, for very superficial reasons or whatever, telling their wives to get their mammograms or whatever it was that worked, and then they prevented and or treated breast cancer earlier as a result, and then better outcomes came of it. So better outcomes can come from manipulation through sexuality. I'm not saying that that's impossible. And one could make the aside that it's obviously sad that it takes that to wake us up to a problem, or to a problem that women are having, etc. So men being possessive of their women's body parts, but whatever it takes sometimes is what it takes to do right. And so to say that glamoring is and must always be bad, of course not. Um, of course not. But that we need to be willing to and able to check in and say, like, am I really doing what's right? Am I really being honest with myself? Am I, self deceiving when I do these behaviors? Because what I'm arguing is that glamoring is just an example of, like, propagandizing is deceiving the other in order to get them to do what you want, manipulation. And so, as such, is the glamorer also misleading themselves into thinking that they are who they say they are, that they're living in accordance and in alignment with what they believe and profess and project. And so, if they can be truly honest with themselves, perhaps they would stop the glamoring, or perhaps they might find a place for it and say, but I'm also going to do this, or I'm going to get my degree in the thing I'm talking about, as well as using my looks to inspire sales of a product that maybe I'm not fully knowledgeable about. So the search for truth has to be part of the process. And I think we so often assume and act as if we are coming from a good place, because we our moms and dads tell us we're good, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback from people who wish they were as pretty or successful. So it can be kind of self reinforcing loop that the person might be in, where they're like, man, I just made $500,000 this year, and everybody likes me and shares, and cool people are coming on my podcast. So of course, um, like just like people do with Trump and the presidency, they're like, well, the majority picked him, so it must be true. And it's like, no, that's not true. Just because the majority thought that he was the best choice doesn't mean that that makes it so. The majority of the people in America used to believe lynchings were okay and slavery was okay. The majority of this country um, believed in exterminating the Native Americans, and the majority in this country probably agreed with FDR when he sent a boat full of Jewish refugees from Israel or from Germany back to their deaths. So we are capable of absolutely disgusting depravity. The majority thinking one thing or another has absolutely nothing to do with whether it's good or valid or true or honest or helpful or kind. So these are the ways we deceive ourselves. And I'm, taking you on this kind of pretzely loop about self-deception. So maybe what I'm arguing at the end is I'm having compassion for the YouTube influencer who is manipulating their followers into doing a thing and making them a living, and that they're probably deceiving themselves about it, and probably by biases and fallacies and propaganda, or you know watching another person do it and saying, well, I'm going to do that same thing, and that person's misleading and using trickery. So it's a tricky time when we don't have like an agreed upon ethic that religion used to provide us far more. And we're still a very religious country and world, but just less so, and less dogmatic about it. And that's for better and for worse. And then when we have a political movement that's might makes right and et cetera, it's easy to kind of play along and or say, well, he's this far down the line. I'm just barely kind of doing this. So there's a kind of a permissiveness that happens um, when a leader is lawless and and doesn't live by an ethical framework and is deceptive, and it allows us to feel like we can do that too. And that's what I've been afraid of from the start for about 10 years with Trump, is that Trumpism would trickle down and make us all kind of ethically compromised, as well as propagandized, as well as less free, and as well as less safe and less kind. And so what I guess I'm hearing from that inner talk that's coming through, and that's kind of talking through me, I think, is that ethics can be discerned internally. And that would sure help if you read a philosophy book or if you watch YouTube videos that present challenging and intellectually formative information. Like that's there too. Somebody that's just like, here's this fallacy, check it out, or here's what this philosopher used to say and think and believe. So you can definitely get around the trickery, I think, if you're seeking truth. And I think that's the question that I want to end this 45-minute video on is, are you seeking the truth? Are my eyes really that small from that angle? Yes, they're just kind of small. Are you seeking the truth, or are you seeking power? And sometimes, are you seeking truth in order to use it to seek power? And that is a damn big question. And again, I don't have the answers, and I do have some questions, and that is a big one. Are you seeking truth, or are you seeking power? Or let's say the third is, are you seeking truth in order to use it to seek power? Dig in, guys.